All right, let's jump right in. We're talking about one of the most high-stakes deadlines in all of personal finance, the 60-day retirement rollover rule. You get it right, your savings keep growing, tax-deferred, beautiful. But if you get it wrong, oh boy, you could be looking at a huge unexpected tax bill. So what happens when, well, life happens?
And listen, it happens way more often than you'd think. Maybe a check gets lost in the mail, there's a family emergency, or the bank just messes up. All of a sudden, that 60-day window doesn't just close, it slams shut. And for years, trying to fix this was an absolute nightmare. But here's the good news. That has all changed.
So here's the big idea behind this rule. It's basically a grace period. It's designed to let you move your retirement money from one account to another without the IRS seeing it as a withdrawal and hitting you with taxes. You take money out of Plan A, and as long as you get it safely into Plan B within those 60 days, it's like a seamless, invisible, tax-free transfer. But that clock is always ticking.
And what happens if that clock hits zero? Oof, it's not pretty. The entire amount you took out can suddenly be treated as taxable income for the year. And, as if that weren't enough, if you're under age 59 and a half, you can get slapped with an extra 10% early distribution tax on top of it. It is a very, very costly mistake.
So let's rewind the clock a little bit, back to before 2016. If you had a totally legitimate reason for missing that deadline, your path to getting it fixed was, let's just say, a nightmare. It was narrow, it was slow, and it was incredibly expensive. There was really only one option on the table. You had to go, hat in hand, to the IRS and ask for something called a private letter ruling, or a PLR for short. This is a super formal process where you're essentially begging the IRS for a personalized binding decision just for your case. And you had to prove that your mistake fell under this vague standard of being against equity or good conscience. And the price tag for this? Absolutely staggering. The user fee alone, just to get your application in the door at the IRS, could be more than $12,000. And that's just the entry fee. It doesn't even count the thousands more you'd almost certainly have to pay a lawyer or an accountant to put the whole complex thing together. And this quote, man, it just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures why the old system was so broken. It created this huge two-tiered system of justice. If you had a multi-million-dollar account, sure, you'd pay the fee to save yourself from a six-figure tax bill. But what about the regular person? Paying over $12,000 to solve a $9,000 tax problem? It makes no sense. You were just out of luck. But thankfully, the story doesn't end there. The IRS actually recognized how unfair this was. And what they came up with wasn't just some minor update. No, it was a complete revolution in how these things are handled. It was a self-service revolution that put the power back in the hands of the taxpayer. So let's trace how we got here. The story kind of starts back in 2001, when Congress first gave the IRS the official power to grant these waivers. But for years, not much happened. The real breakthrough, the big one, landed in 2016 with something called Revenue Procedure 2016-47. This introduced a radical new idea, self-certification. And then, just a few years later, in 2020, they expanded on it, making the process even clearer and more accessible. And honestly, this is the absolute best way to think about this massive change. The old way, the PLR system, was a mother may I system. You had to ask the IRS for permission before you did anything. The new self-certification system is totally different. It's about you, the taxpayer, making the move first and then being ready to justify your actions if the IRS ever comes knocking. Let's put these two side by side because it really makes the difference pop. With a PLR, you're shelling out a ton of money and you have to wait and wait, but you get a rock-solid, formal waiver from the IRS. With self-certification, the IRS user fee is zero, and you can complete the rollover right away. So what's the catch? The trade-off is certainty. It's a bit lower because your reasons are subject to review if you ever get audited. Okay, so you're probably wondering, how do I actually do this? How does this self-service fix work? Well, there are three absolutely critical hurdles you have to clear to be eligible.
Okay, first up, you can't be trying to get a second bite of the apple. If you already went the expensive route and applied for a PLR for this exact rollover and the IRS already said no, then I'm sorry, you're done. You can't just turn around and self-certify. Number two, and this is a big one, your reason for being late has to fit neatly into one of 12 very specific pre-approved categories. And finally, number three, you can't sit on it. Once the problem that caused the delay is fixed, you have to move fast and get that rollover done.
And here they are, the 12 magic reasons. You can see they kind of fall into a few buckets.
You've got a bunch that are basically the institution messed up, a bank error, a lost check, a mistake with the mail. Then you have the really serious life stuff, a death in the family, a major illness, serious damage to your home, even being incarcerated. And then there are some more unique ones, like postal errors or delays from the company that sent you the money. That last one about unclaimed property funds, that was actually added in 2020.
Now, that last rule about acting promptly can feel a little vague, right? As soon as practicable, what does that even mean? Well, luckily, the IRS gave us a really clear guideline, what they call a safe harbor. Basically, if you make that contribution within 30 days of the problem being solved, say 30 days after you get the misplaced check reissued, you are automatically considered to have acted promptly. No questions asked.
Okay, now I need you to lean in for this next part, because it is the most important thing to understand about this whole process. This self-certification tool is amazing. It's powerful, it's accessible, but it is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It comes with a very real responsibility.
I want you to really hear this. This is a direct quote from the IRS, word for word. A self-certification is not a waiver. What that means is, when you self-certify, you're not getting a stamp of approval from them up front. You are simply raising your hand and telling them that you believe you qualify. The final call, that could still be made down the road.
The best way to think about your self-certification letter is like testifying in court. It's a formal affidavit, a sworn statement. You need to keep a copy of it with your tax records forever, right alongside any proof you have to back up your story. Hospital bills, letters from the bank, whatever. Because if the IRS audits you and they decide your reason wasn't quite good enough or you waited too long, poof, they can unwind the whole thing and you're right back where you started, facing that big tax bill plus penalties.
So what's the bottom line here? It all comes down to a strategic choice. The new self-certification process is fantastic, but it hasn't completely killed off the old PLR system. What you have now are two very different tools in your toolkit, and you've got to be smart about picking the right one for your specific situation.
And this table just lays it all out perfectly. On one hand, you've got self-certification. It costs you nothing in IRS fees. It's immediate, but it comes with that little bit of audit risk, and it only works for those 12 specific reasons. On the other hand, you've got the PLR. It's crazy expensive, it's super slow, but you get ironclad certainty, and it works for a much wider range of good conscience reasons.
So you might be asking, why would anyone ever use the old expensive PLR system anymore? Well, there are a couple of really important scenarios where it still makes a ton of sense. First, if you're rolling over a huge amount of money, we're talking 7 figures, that $12,000 fee is a small price to pay for absolute peace of mind. And second, if your reason for being late, while totally valid, just doesn't fit into one of those 12 specific boxes, the PLR is still your only option for relief.
So in the end, what the IRS has done here is they've democratized the fix for a late rollover. They've handed the power from their hands back into yours. But with that power comes a big responsibility. The central idea has shifted. It's not about asking for permission anymore, it's about acting with justification. So the final question for you is, are you prepared to document?